All right. Okay. Let's see what we got here. Okay, Toby. Um, servant leadership. Prioritizing self versus prioritizing others. So, why is it the title? Why is that your thing? What do you think?
For me, I kind of started playing around with the idea like the beginning of freshman year, like coming here, like going from being just the top of like where I was to coming here and like not being the best and like not knowing how to add value in ways other than being the top performer, and I wasn't the top performer. And so that's kind of when I first started to play around with it, and I would get stuck in my head a lot, and I've always been like the type of player where it's never like a skills thing, it's a mental thing. And to me, looking for things outside of myself was kind of how I brought myself back and got myself working towards what I needed to be doing and accomplishing what I needed to accomplish.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. I didn't know that was the background. Um, so, what was like the transition from when you started to have the idea to like how did that evolve basically?
It started, I would say the first thing where I really was like, okay, I'm gonna like make this my thing within our like babies on the team. Like I kind of made social media like my thing. Like I pushed for us to like get the TikTok and be putting content out there, and like if I couldn't go and play in like the one seat as a freshman kind of thing, then like I was gonna be really, really good at that and find a different way to like boost the team.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, what is like your current plan basically?
The current plan has now evolved more so from just like stuff I guess having to do like more external to finding ways to like feed back into the team. So my like overarching team goal has been like finding every week I have to find something to do to serve the team. And so that's been like cleaning people's shoes, or like we had the nets kind of like get screwed up, and so I went and sewed those up by hand, like finding ways to make everyone else's job easier and like take whether that be that mental weight or like some sort of time restraint off of everyone else so that everyone else can perform their best and not have to worry about external stuff.
Yeah. Do you think that do you think that like I guess what's the line between what's significant enough to where people feel that servant
Yeah.
leadership and what's like just straight up too much work?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And that's like the line where like I've been trying to juggle, because it's definitely a weird thing between like there has to be a level of buy-in from everybody in order for it to really have an impact, and like trying to find that proper balance, because it's not always going to be something that is effective if everyone else isn't like coming from the same mindset. But I also think that it can be contagious the more that you see it.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of like it's almost like a parent, does so much for their kids, but the kid basically takes it for granted.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of a risk that seems like you run a little bit. And so it seems to me like you would have to choose things that, the team needs to sort of feel. Well, I don't know. I guess that's sort of the question about servant leadership is that does it matter if they notice it or not? You know what I
And
mean?
I don't think that it always has to matter that they notice it or not.
Because I think like if I had to guess, I mean, true servant leadership is like you don't need anything out of it.
Correct.
I think that ideally, I mean, servant leadership becomes contagious, and people, people on the team have positive feelings towards you because of the things you're doing for the team, and so it works in a like a feedback loop. But I guess that's sort of my question: is that what's the line between doing it just to serve and doing it because you want your team to see you adding value to the team?
Yeah. It's a weird, like, I don't know. Because there was a point where I was just like, I don't know that this, like, is what I should be doing, but I think if it's done with the right intention and not, like, from a, like, seeking to feed your ego, because I think that's kind of where people want to be a servant leader until they don't get recognized, and it's kind of like, do the work in the dark to kind of, like, allow everyone else to shine where they need to shine, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that's easier said than done.
Yes, definitely.
I think it also, do you ever fear that it puts you like in a box of like just being you know, the person that just does all the dirty work. And I mean, because I don't know, I guess, do you ever fear that that is gonna like, you're never gonna be recognized for it. You're, you know, like, I don't know, do you know what I'm trying to ask?
Yeah, no, I get what you're getting at. To me, it's just like, it's definitely something that I've gone back and forth with, and definitely a spot where I've been frustrated, and I've also seen other people, like, I think a lot about Callie, and then I think there's a lot of things that she did for our team when she was here that just, like, flat out did not get recognized. And I think it's, like, striking that balance of, like, doing it and genuinely being invested in it for the right reasons, but also seeking opportunities to bring other people in on it.
Yeah. Yeah, because, you know, when I think about this thing, I wonder, like, what's the end goal / is there a goal? Or is it
Yeah.
just a habit and just a way of being, you know?
Yeah.
Like, is there a goal? Like, what is the logical sort of, like, outcome or end point of servant leadership?
I think just the concept of, like, you're going to keep clapping and keep supporting and keep doing everything that you can do until it's your turn. And, like, I'm, like, losing my train of thought a little bit.
And that it would come back around
It would come
towards
back
you,
around,
like,
yeah.
like people would want to give in, like, pour into you because, like, they've seen how much you've given to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's tough because, I mean, I think it's like a thankless thing a lot of the time,
Yeah.
you know? What else is, like, I don't know, what do you think about it? What other questions, topics do you have about it?
I guess I was kind of curious what your thought on the quote, like, as far as your personal leadership philosophy. There's this one quote that I found. It says, "If serving is beneath you, then leadership is beyond you." And I was just kind of curious, like, what your thoughts on that as it pertains to you.
Yeah, I think it's really important to, as a leader, to try to do as many things on the same level, like, not be above doing certain work, like, for example, like raking the courts or like cleaning the locker room or picking leaves or doing any of that stuff. I think it's really important to try to, like, even like if I'm playing in practice, like doing the burpees if I lose the drill type of thing, you know, like, which I kind of view that as, what is it called? If serving is beneath you?
Yeah, if serving is beneath
Yeah.
you, then leadership is beyond you.
Yeah, I mean, because I feel like people will just lose respect for you if they don't think that you would do the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the truth, is that if I am being led by someone and I think, like, they would never do this, like,
Yeah.
then it's just, I think it builds like a animosity, you know, towards your leader. It builds like a tempestuous relationship, because you have to believe that, like, you know, one thing I really respected about the previous coaches that I worked for is that I always felt like I was a hard worker, and I still do, but, like, they were pretty hard to outwork.
Yeah.
Like, and that's like a really, I mean, that's, you know, that's a really, I think, powerful thing to work with and work under, is people that, like, you can't outwork.
Yeah.
Because if you're, like, working harder than your leader, then it's like, then you think that you are better than them, and you think that you should be, whatever, doing their job or whatever. And so just the idea of work ethic and serving and doing all of the things and not just the things that you like, which it definitely, you know, part of the benefits of becoming a leader is that you get the privilege to maybe sometimes choose to not do the things that you've sort of outgrown, you know, I think. But generally speaking, like, I think it's important people believe that you have done it, will do it, like, that you're not above any sort of thing. So I agree with that, you know, but I know that there are some people that think that, and this is slightly different than what you're talking about, but some people that think that when you're the coach or you're the boss, like what that means is that you don't do that stuff.
Yeah.
Like what that means is that you delegate and lead others to do those things because that's part of the privilege of that role.
Yeah.
Which, yes and no, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, I think, like I said, it is a little bit of a privilege of the role of leadership to not have to do all the things that are not the most fun when it comes to service. But if you're not like bought into the same process that the people you're leading are, then yeah, I just think you can't be a really effective leader, you know?
Yeah. So like, what's your whole, I guess kind of part of what ties into me with this has to do with like, how do I want to word this? Like working for a common, like, do you think that teams who work for themselves as individuals versus teams who like work for each other in a common like larger purpose, like what do you think, like?
Yeah, no, that's tough because, to be honest, I've never really been on a team, I don't think, or really, I don't know if I've ever been around a team that's like, I feel like really embodied the idea of like working for each other.
Yeah.
I just don't know if I've ever seen that. I mean, I know that's something people talk about. Like those are like the strong teams.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the ones that go far. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've really observed like a really good example of that yet, like in my life. So like I kind of believe that that's true, but I honestly don't know what it looks like because and I think that I'd imagine that it's harder to do that. I think honestly, like each generation is sort of getting more and more selfish.
I think that's
Like
fair.
I'm certainly way more selfish than my parents are and were, and I think people that are younger than me are slightly more selfish than I am, in terms of like, and you can see that in like other industries, like just the degree to which people change jobs now.
Yeah.
And there's a fair argument to be made that there's a good reason for that, but as that relates to like a shared goal, it's causing a really tricky dynamic because like people are really realizing like life is short and why would we shortchange ourselves and what we want and what our goals are for something that doesn't necessarily serve us as individuals. You know, so as it relates to a team, for example, like it's a much harder value proposition to give someone to tell them like you're not going to play, you're not going to start, but like it's important that you give to this team because of like you have a shared goal. Like I just don't know if people like are viewing it that way so much anymore, which yeah, so I don't know if that's holding things back or if that's just an inevitable change, or I don't know, like what do you think about like that? You know, a good example too is like obviously the transfer portal.
Yeah.
You know, like it's so prolific now and it's people are leaving when the situation doesn't necessarily suit them.
Yeah.
And on one hand, as a coach, I'm kind of like, that's kind of a bummer because, you know, part of a strong culture is like everyone being bought in, even when it doesn't necessarily benefit them as an individual. Like that seems like something that's beneficial. The other part of it is like, I get it, you know, so I don't know, like, what do you think about that?
I don't know, I think it's a weird situation because there's value in prioritizing yourself, but I also think like there's also in a lot of ways, especially like a team is a bigger picture than just yourself, and like whether or not you're the top contributor or like you're the person on the sidelines like helping get water, like everyone's individual role matters and like carries the same weight, I think. And so it's like, do you value the commitment and like buying into that and like truly buying in, or do you value like your own individual?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's
It's like
that's
a weird
great on paper
line to strike.
because, but
Yes.
that's great on paper. But my question is that what you think people are committing to?
No.
I mean, And so what do you think the vast majority, and I don't know if even yourself, like, what do you think the vast majority of people think they're committing to when they're committing to like a college team, a program?
I think more so like the idea of like being there and being, I think everyone commits with the thought of like, I'm gonna go here, I'm gonna produce, and I'm gonna perform, like I'm gonna go be like the once player. And I think a lot of people get it twisted in their head to where they show up and it's not like that, and it's kind of like, holy crap, like what do I do now? And I think that's where a lot of either people quitting after their freshman year, because I think that happens a lot, or entering the transfer portal pretty soon. Like I think that's where a lot of that comes from. Not to say that there's not situations where that's valid and there's like other stuff going on, but I think there's a lot more like preventable, like transferring, quitting situations.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree. I think that, you know, but people when they commit to a team, like they'll say the right things, but ultimately they're probably just envisioning their own glory, basically.
Yeah. Well, it's easy to say that you're going to be a team player and be a contributor when you think you're the number one spot.
Yeah, and even if you're not number one, like it's just people imagine themselves playing, and they imagine themselves playing well, and they imagine themselves having the life that they want.
Yeah.
They don't imagine themselves like serving the team from the darkness. Like very few people are like just like that. That's actually why I kind of try to lead. And I don't know if this is right or wrong. So because of that reality that I think people commit for selfish reasons,
Yeah.
I try to lead our team in a way that doesn't fight that reality, but like sort of leverages it. So I try to lead our team in a way that's like very, you know, you guys have a lot of autonomy and you have your own voice and you have your own opinion, and I ask you questions and take your feedback and direct the program in the ways that you feel like you can be you and get yours.
Yeah.
Right? Because I want to leverage our selfishness basically in a way that just like, I'm like, where's the overlap? Okay, we all want to like maybe find success beach volleyball wise. That's pretty clear overlap in our selfishness. And so I'm trying to just leverage that rather than create a situation where people have to buy into something that it's just, I don't know if people are that way.
Yeah.
You know, like to be truly like put the team first.
Yeah.
You know, you see a lot of teams and it's like team first. I see that a lot. I see like different sports and all sorts of stuff. It's like team first, team first, team first. And even we've talked about that. We talked about team goals superseding individual goals.
Yeah.
So it's just like, it's really, I don't know how to handle that. I don't know how to deal with that. And I don't know, I fear, this is why I'm curious to see how your thing plays out, because I fear that servant leadership will be a thankless thing. I don't know basically like what do you think, and I sort of already asked this, but what do you think the return on the investment is from servant leadership as it relates to the team?
Honestly, I think there's a lot of it that I've kind of come to terms with, like, it doesn't need to necessarily be recognized. And I think for me, it's more of it gives me, especially like with me coming back from the concussion and like not necessarily being like where I was before, it gives me a sense of purpose and allows me to feel like I'm still contributing and like moving things forward and like making sure everyone else is like got their thing going so that we can like put our best foot forward. Like if I'm not going to be the one who's like going and playing whatever seed and like winning whatever like big match against whoever, then like I'm going to do things to allow other people to do that, I guess. And to me, like when I get stuck in my head and I'm just like spiraling and doing my own thing, that helps pull me out and like reshift the focus and like remember what like the actual goal is.
Right. I mean, yeah, I think, someone that like did a good job of that. I mean, like when we had Rundy as manager,
Yeah.
it was like, yeah, I mean, he pretty clearly just like was a servant, like leader, and really I sort of like fostered a lot of positive energy just by like his willingness to like do whatever needed to be done.
Yeah.
So I think I'm having this thought that, and you said it earlier, that it's probably going to be the most powerful, as you said, if you're able to bring others into it.
Yeah.
You know, if you're able to say, hey, let's do this. Like, it would be really nice for everybody if we did this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they would really appreciate this, or, you know, constantly looking for ways to do that. But yeah, it's definitely, this is like a much longer conversation, but I wonder if like the idea of servant leadership is like fading, you know?
It's definitely become, I think there's more and more need for it, and it's becoming less and less valued.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. There's definitely more and more need for it. It would be more beneficial for more people to do it, to practice it. But it's definitely the public sort of perception on it is definitely changing with generationally. I mean, in every sort of way. Just the idea of like, like the anti-work like movement.
Yeah.
Where it's like
why
are you going the extra mile?
Yeah.
Why are you going the extra mile for your company?
Yeah.
You know, when they're not doing anything for you. Like, that's just, there's not gonna be anything, like, why are you putting yourself through that, you know?
Yeah.
And in a way, you know, our team is kind of like a company. It's much different than a company in a lot of ways. But, like, there is, like, a business aspect of it where there's, like, there's a point of diminishing return where you can't get nothing out of it.
Yeah. Bless you.
You can't get nothing out of being on the team, for sure. So that's where there does have to be an overlap in your individual, like, goals and desires.
Yeah.
You know, and I think as a coach, the best way that it works, now this is too idealistic, but, you know, people shouldn't commit to, like, the outcomes, like the glory days.
Yeah.
They should commit to, like, the process.
Yes.
You know, like, if you really know that you're committing to, like, being pushed and failing and getting back up and doing it and having someone like steward you through that process of like personal and professional athletic development, which is a very valuable process to me. If you wrapped your head around that was the thing you were committing to, then how you would grade yourself and how you would, you know, serve yourself and the team would be in a different metric.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think people commit to like, winning the big matches on Saturdays.
Winning the big matches, like wearing the cool jersey, having the gear, doing the whole.
Yeah, and I think I get that, but if what I view you as really committing to, and I try to say this in the recruiting process, is you're committing to like this process of trying to do that.
Yeah.
You know, that may happen, that may not happen.
Yeah.
But you're committing to the effort to try to do that.
Yeah.
Like the act of attempting to gain that outcome.
Yeah. And I thought you represented that, at least in my recruiting process. Like, that was, for me, like, the big, like, why SFA was different. Like, obviously, there were other, like, circumstances where it all fit and, like, it lined up. But to me, like, my main, like, if money wasn't an issue and, like, location wasn't a thing and, like, education, all these other things, like, the deciding factor for me was the fact that I thought SFA was a place where I could develop as an individual and as a player, and that was a priority for you, and not just somewhere where I could go and be on a roster.
Wow, that's good to hear. I mean, very few people, and you've been one of them, very few people are like, can really take that like development process, like, because once you start hitting the walls a little bit and like going through some tough stuff and like not being good enough, failing at certain things, falling short, and you run out of reasons why that is, and it ends up being that it's like you.
Yeah.
That becomes like it becomes a stopping point for a lot of people.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. Yeah. So the dynamic of like self-interest, like you said, basically self-interest versus team interest is I think, a huge factor in how this plays out. I mean, do you think that people are either one way or the other, or do you think that it's a spectrum?
I think in the most like optimal situation, it's kind of striking a balance between the two. Like I think and that's I think where a lot of stuff gets kind of stuck, especially with our team. I think we get like caught in the trap of like there is like a healthy amount of self-interest, but then like, and then there is an element of like serving each other, but I think it like mixes in the wrong ways. Like I think a lot about like for us, particularly more last year than this year, but like partnerships could get really toxic with like the servant leadership mentality, because it was like, what do you want, what do you need, what do you want, what do you need, but not like communicating properly like your own needs and like your own expectations, or like being scared. Like there's an element to being selfish that is very important. It just has to be like with the right intention and like still keeping everything in mind. Like you can be selfish for the purpose of like uplifting the team, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that actually gives me a lot of ideas. Like, and it makes me have a question and an idea for you to do. But like, what about the idea of like servant partnership? So you just kind of touched on it a little bit. Like, there's well, answer that first, and I'll tell you what I think.
Okay.
Servant partnership, like, what is that a thing? What is it? What does it look like? Is there a way that it goes bad? Is it a way that it goes good? Like,
I think servant partnership, it is the idea of like putting your partner and like prioritizing like everything that you can do for them and like playing for them over playing for yourself. I think it's a very hard balance to strike, especially like with like young adult, like teenage girl age range. I think that's a weird thing to strike, because it's like we get caught in this trap of wanting to people please, and you won't like vouch for your own needs out of like fear of like messing with that dynamic.
oh man, I didn't even. So that's that seems like it's fair to say that's something that's somewhat specific to like your age and gender.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's like
I think it's a very good concept on paper. I think for our particular like gender and age range and just like stage of life, it is very, very difficult to like properly execute.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, the first year here, we did this thing, I'll never forget this. We did this thing we made these things called brag statements, where we had to like have this 2-3 sentence thing where like we were bragging about ourselves, right? And like I found it really easy, but all the players really struggle with it.
That would make me very uncomfortable.
And that's so strange to me, because I'm just wired that way. I mean, the idea that you wouldn't be able to articulate the things that you're confident about yourself in is like, I don't know what that is. I don't get that.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if that's upbringing. I don't know if that's gender. I don't know if that's age. Because I feel like I could have probably done it when I was that age too.
Yeah.
What is uncomfortable about like? What is uncomfortable about being unapologetically sort of not selfish, but like, because I think that, how do I say this? Like, you guys can be, and I don't mean this in a bad way, you guys have no problems being selfish.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes you do have problems, like you said, acknowledging yourself.
Yeah.
Like, in terms of like, I need this, I need to do this. This is going to make me my best self.
Yeah.
What is that?
I don't know that it's necessarily, I mean, to me, it's like I have my own bias from like my lens and like my perspective of like being like a 20-year-old girl. I think a lot of it does have to do with like age and gender, like, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a lot of like, as a girl, like, be yourself, but don't be too much, but also like, don't be too much, but then like, why are you being so quiet?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Like, you need to go and be yourself, but if you're too much, then like everyone's gonna hate you. But then if you're too quiet, everyone's gonna be like, what are you doing? Like, why won't you just like open your mouth and speak up for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think that dynamic is amplified in like athletics.
Yes.
Because we're demanding that you like be more you.
Yeah.
Because like be a more you, be a louder you,
Yes.
be a more confident you, be a more, contagious you. And so you're sort of stuck in this dynamic where it's like that's an unnatural thing to do, kind of.
Well, and there's also the different like incentives with it too. Sorry, not to cut you off.
Yeah.
But just like be yourself and do your thing to like please your coaches. But if you do that, is that going to mess with the team dynamic? And are they going to view you differently and treat you differently? And like, do I value being like the coach's like pet or whatever, or do I value like fitting in with the team?
Yeah, that's interesting. So one thing I think that you should do as part of your thing is we need to have a day, or maybe one day a week, or maybe something where you can keep doing your servant thing and finding projects to serve the team, but it's like, how are you going to bring others into that? One of the ways is maybe today we have a day where it's like, hey, we're going to practice like servant partnership. So it's just like you're filling up your partner's water bottle for them. You're being their best, advocate. You're cheering for them. You're like, doing all that stuff to kind of maybe see how it goes. I'm imagining it can be like fun and funny, just to like prepare everything for your partner.
Yeah.
Which is different than what happens a lot, which is what do you need from me?
Yeah.
Which like that's.
I think that's where it gets toxic very fast.
Yeah, and not like purposefully toxic,
Yeah.
but it gets.
Like the intention's there, but it gets twisted really easily.
It just gets. I just feel like it creates not a great energy, because and this happens a lot, is that I think it's a big misconception, particularly that a lot of younger players have, that you think you're being a good partner if you're like, yeah, I'm always asking my partner what they need. They need that set different. You need to switch sides. Like, what do you need from me? What do you want from me? And it's like, that is really good on the surface, because you're like, that's really well intended, but think about the energy of the court when it's like, what do you need? What do you need? You need from me? Blah, blah, blah. It's like, it's very like,
right, and it's not.
Yeah, it's very defensive. Like, it's very like, there's a problem.
Yeah.
Like, how do we fix it?
Yeah.
How do we put the fire out? How do we stop the bleeding?
Yeah.
Well, and then it's like, you're asking the person who's probably struggling to like solve their own problem for you. Like, if they could solve their own problem, like they would have done
in the
it.
hole. Yeah.
So I think it's like really actually backwards. Like, when your partner's struggling, you almost need to like it's imagine like someone that can't drive.
Yeah.
And they're in the driver's seat and you're in the passenger seat and you're like, and they're just about to crash, and like,
Yeah.
what do you need? What do you
Like,
need?
you
Blah,
reach
blah, blah.
over
Do you
and you
need me
grab
to
the
give you
wheel.
different directions? And it's like, what they need you to do is like get in the driver's seat for them.
Yeah.
For just a little bit. Allow them to keep their head clear. Hey, switch spots with me. I got you. We're doing this.
Yeah.
Like, I got us for a little bit. And then it's like, okay, I'm back. We're back now. Now we can take turns driving.
Mm.
So that is where I agree with you, that I think that it's tricky, because to be a servant leader or be a servant partner or a servant teammate or whatever, it's like there's definitely like good ways to do it, and there's definitely like weird ways to do it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
It's like don't get stuck in the hole of like asking the questions of what to do. Like, find the ways to like make the choices to better the situation. Like, make the active choice instead of asking the passive question.
Right. Yeah. Active choice instead of passive question. Yeah, that's a really good way to put it too.
Do you think that like, because obviously I only have my experience like playing the women's game, does that happen in the same way like with the men's game, in your opinion? Because it kind of like, it almost begs the question to me, like, it makes me think of the whole concept of like, have you heard like, sorry is like the worst female habit, and like that whole like, discussion? Like, it reminds me a lot of that, and I guess I'm curious if that
passiveness.
Like, yeah, like the passiveness
kinda.
and like, how can I serve you, like I'm just down here kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like, do you think that same dynamic kind of plays into the men's game as much, or is it genuinely like?
No, I think it does. I think that dynamic does happen in the men's game. It is different. It is different in a lot of ways. Like, guys, again, there's generalities, but guys a lot of times tend to get angrier rather than like
Shrinking.
Then what?
Just like shrinking almost.
Yeah, then like like they get outwardly like angrier, and I guess it's just a testosterone.
Yeah.
It's like the testosterone, like the frustration is outwardly more intense. I think for females it's like inwardly probably more intense. You know, your self-talk is probably actually much worse as a female than as a male. As a male, I think a lot of us just have like this like sort of like toxic self-confidence. Like we always know that there's like a way to, you know, so it's just a matter of like, but so in terms of that relationship, like energy, you know, I don't think it's like much better in guys, that it's like we're not just better at like you know, hey, here's what we're gonna do, solve the problem, blah blah blah. Like I think there's still a lot of like really bad inefficiencies with like the relationship. One of the things that happens with men's a lot more than women's, I think when there's a problem like in the women's game, like they will be like, what do you need, blah blah, that's kind of thing that will happen. And the men, they just won't talk about it at all.
Yeah.
They just won't. Like communication is, if you've ever coached boys or played with guys, the communication is like by far the weakest quality. I mean, I can say that's true with like so much time will pass by with something not being said.
Yeah.
And that actually kills, like that actually is kind of a thing that happens on this indoor team I'm playing on too, is like I'm sitting around like, are we gonna like talk about a strategy? Are we gonna talk about the whatever? It's like, no, it's just like, it's just competing.
Yeah.
There's no like
go out there
there's no
just, like,
communicating and dialoguing the problem solving of team chemistry, team strategy, team whatever. So I think it manifests itself a little bit differently. Like I think they're not better at it. I don't know, like it's like choose your poison, you know? It's like, do you want that kind of passive energy that's like, what do we need to do? What do we need to change? Blah, blah, blah. Like I'm here, it's kind of just like not really solving the problem. Or do you want this like, we're trying really hard, but we're not really communicating about it. So it's like the problem's also not getting solved. It's like they're just two sides of the same coin, you know?
Different like processes of insanity.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, exactly.
This one's kind of more, so like obviously there's roles of leadership as far as like coaching goes, and then roles of leadership in the way of like being like a member of the team. Do you think that the priority of leadership, A, changes between like those two different types of leadership, and B, do you think that the priority of that should be acquiring rank versus acquiring like uplifting others?
That's a good question. I think there's a lot of questions in that question.
Yes.
But I think that I don't think you can lead the same way as like a coach than you can as a player. Because I think as a player you have a really big challenge. Like I think it's way more challenging to try to be a leader as a player than a coach. I mean, as a coach, obviously I have a title, you know, and that just grants me authority, you know. As a player, to try to be a leader, it's much more soft skills involved, because people really have to buy into the things you're saying, because you don't have a title. You're like equal to them, you know. And so the way you have to go about like getting people's respect is a lot more political. And I don't mean that in a toxic way. I mean, it's a lot more like people have to know what you're thinking and why you're thinking it, and have to see in your actions, and those things have to align. And that's somewhat true for a coach, but like as a player, like people have to make a really strong judgment call on why you're doing what you're doing. And you know, like we've experienced this a lot, like people on our team trying to do good things, leadership things, but us questioning their motives.
Yeah.
And so that's what makes it way more challenging to like practice leadership as a player. What was the second part of your question?
Should the priority be uplifting others or acquiring like rank?
Yeah. That I honestly don't know. I kind of spoke on that a little bit earlier. I honestly don't know, because what it should be maybe is one thing. What it actually can be is maybe another thing. Like I mentioned that I think there's a lot of selfishness in both myself and also my generation and generations younger. And I don't know how much of that we're able to fight, you know? And if I'm being honest with myself, I'm definitely more of like a self-server than like a servant leader. And so I just know that I can't, like I couldn't sustain a style of leadership that is like sort of servant-oriented. I know a lot of coaches that are, because that's who they are. And I think they create a much different team culture and a much different team dynamic. And they attract a much different type of player.
Yeah.
So I think ultimately, like, I'm of the belief that you just need to practice, like, authenticity. And I think it's okay, and this may change, and this may be, like, my immaturity as a coach, but I think it's okay if you're like, look, I'm in this for myself. But being that I'm on the team, like, I'm recognizing that, like, what I want aligns with what the team wants. So, like, it's kind of okay. Like, if there's an alignment there, then it's like it's okay to be selfish, I feel like, in a way.
Yeah.
And seek like rank, quote unquote. Because if in the process of seeking like playing in the ones, you're making our team more competitive and you're challenging people and you're doing all this stuff, then it's like, then you are having a positive effect on the team group and the team culture. The question is like, what's going to happen if you don't get what you want? Then do you become like negatively selfish, toxically selfish? So, because I think, and this might be a really, really weird comparison, but like the idea of like capitalism is basically the idea of like leveraging people's self-interest.
It leverages human behavior.
It leverages human behavior. It says like people want to do what they want to do and they think they can do it better. So it's a free market.
Yeah.
It's a free market, right?
Make a system to use that. Yeah.
So do I think that's a perfect system? Definitely not, because there's a lot of toxicity and there's a lot of like stuff that goes bad. What I think it should be is like the team goals should always come first.
Yeah.
People should be in it for the team, because it's the team that wins and loses. You know what I mean? It's like we're graded as a team. We're measured as a team. But is that attainable? Like, are people prepared to do that?
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's interesting to me that you bring that up too, because it's also like, in the true like scheme of things, there is no 100% pure form of capitalism. Like there is always going to be elements of like socialism and like other things mixed into it. So like, is that almost how it needs to be like within the team as well?
That's a really interesting point, because it's like our team is like, you see capitalism have these limitations, and there needs to be like checks and balances to that free market in the form of like antitrust laws or whatever it is, or tax laws. And so as it relates to the team, it's like, okay, maybe we're going to take the approach that we're going to leverage our self-interest to drive the team forward, but like it can't be a free-for-all.
Yeah.
Because that wouldn't be a team.
Yeah.
And that would be really toxic. And the people wouldn't build good relationships if it was like just based on self-interest. So there has to be some idea of like, I don't know, us incentivizing things a certain way to incentivize certain like behaviors, or supporting each other, or just building the relationships. I think helps with like, it's harder to be like toxically selfish when we really get to know each other and we like each other. and we see the hard work each other's putting in,
Yeah.
it then becomes more difficult to like not care about that.
Yeah.
So we're trying to like promote, I guess, relationships, because relationships probably breed more, I guess, mutual interests rather than like self-interest, if that makes sense. Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, at the same time, like the opposing argument is like, what's like a team that's only servant leadership? Is that like communism?
Yeah.
And is like that's like
Does that actually accomplish anything when everyone's like
that's like
not working necessarily for themselves?
yeah, like is the fire as hot there when you're working for other people's goals?
Yeah.
You know, and like I don't know, you know, like
Well, yeah,
both
'cause it's
systems on
almost like
paper work
work.
and make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Both systems in reality have major flaws.
Yeah.
And you know, I don't know if any country in the world has like figured out the perfect system. And so it's like I don't know. I mean, so just to give you another example, like, which is kind of related to this, like this coach Anson Dorrance, who's like this famous coach from North Carolina, women's soccer or whatever.
Yeah.
He like invented this thing I think called the competitive cauldron, which is where they basically statted everything in practice. Like they statted everything, statted every touch. Like his whole staff, like all they did in practice was just stat. All they did was compete. All they did was like compete. And they basically made all their decisions based on stats, like based on pure performance. So it's kind of like it's just basically getting yours every day.
Yeah.
And that fire bred a lot of competitiveness, and it like made people better, and it made the whole level rise, and it let the cream rise to the top. Because the argument is that, again, the end goal of a team is ideally, I guess, to win competitions. And so if you work backwards from that, what are the things we should be measuring and looking at in our practices? Like the things that are going to lead us to like winning.
Yeah.
You know? So I guess to turn that into a question is like, how does servant leadership or servant teamship, how does that relate to the team goal of winning? / do you think that the goal of a team is to win? Or do you think it's different?
I think the ultimate goal of the team is always going to be to win. I think, especially with like a younger team like ours, it's not necessarily like something that's going to be like for us, like becoming like a ranked team, for example. Like that's not something that's going to happen year one. And so it's kind of like winning all those games becomes like this large like overarching goal, and like doing the small things. For a while it's going to be, well, it should always be intention, should always be the number one priority. And I think the servant leadership kind of like carries more with the intention versus like execution. And I think the intention is always there and you're working like towards that. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, it's kind of like, I think the thing you have to start with is, what is our goal as a team?
Yeah.
If it's to win, if that's what you really believe, then the question would be, is servant leadership one of the things that promote us moving toward that goal?
Yeah.
If it's not to win, if it's something else, which is a very fair argument, that it's like, maybe it's like just becoming better people, or learning more about, or developing, or the process, or whatever it is, then it's like, yeah, so then it's like, what is the, again, like, how are the demands of our goals informing our process?
Yeah. I guess for me it's like all of those smaller like non-winning goals are like steps along the way to the overarching like goal of winning, because I think you can go and you can be a team that can win, but to be a team that like stays there and consistently is that way, you have to have more to fall back on.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Yeah. That's a really good point. Otherwise it's just like lightning in a bottle, like,
yeah. In
just
order to have like
happens
the
once.
long-term steady success, you have to have those little goals that you accomplished on the way, which is like why the process is so important, because you have something to fall back on, and even if you don't accomplish the overarching goal, that doesn't necessarily negate all the process and like all the work that you did and the progress and change that you made on the way.
Yeah, that's really insightful. It's like if you want to sustain excellence, then there's got to be a foundation, and the foundation is maybe stuff that's like servant leadership and
that's why team
positive
culture is
relationships,
such a
team
valuable
culture.
thing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's a really good way to put it. Yeah. Well, what else you have?
Which roles on the team do you think are not compromisable and like bring the most value? And also to go off of that, like what is the most overlooked role on a team in your opinion?
Definitely someone's got to be like, I don't want to say at the top, but like someone's got to be the person.
Yeah.
That's like
leading the pack.
I think it's extremely valuable, and I think that person, it doesn't have to be one person, but like there has to be one or two or three people at the top that like aren't afraid of like saying what needs to be said and are confident enough in themselves. And those people typically tend to be the oldest, because I think just with age comes confidence. And I just imagine our team without that role.
Yeah.
Well,
especially with our team being so young, it'd just be like headless chickens running around.
Yeah. The experience, someone that's older, not necessarily older, but someone that's confident enough to share the experience and like let that confidence sort of like be contagious. Like, hey, this is what it's going to be like. This is what we need to do. This is what it takes.
Yeah.
Like, I've been there. That I think is non-negotiable. And I think it will happen no matter what. It's just a matter of if you have a good person there or not.
Yeah.
Like, it will happen naturally no matter what. That's just like group dynamics 101. The other thing that I think is extremely important is like the team, like personality, like as a person or two people, whatever. Like best teams, my observations, they have a personality. They have an identity. They have like, if you look at our indoor team and it's like they're always doing their cheers.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know, that's like a pretty, like, they play a lot of teams. I don't see a lot of other teams doing that, and our team's pretty good. And like, I definitely know and have seen that like, there's like a few individuals that are sort of like leading that thing. Like they're like the, I don't know, I don't want to call them cheerleaders because that's not all what I mean, but like, they're the spice, like they're giving things personality and like flavor and fun and energy. That is really important. And like, I am always actually actively seeking people that are like, that have a little bit of like flavor to them.
Yeah.
'Cause I think it's really important, What else? I do think, per your servant leadership thing, like, and you mentioned Callie, like, who's the person that's always like just doing everything right?
Yeah.
Who's the person that's like, they're bulletproof?
Yeah.
They're taking care of their grades. They're cleaning up. They're raking. They're showing up on time. They're doing everything. Like, they eventually will have strong ground to stand on to be able to say, hey, like, this, it's important to do these things right.
Yeah.
So that is sort of like the servant leader, I guess I would say, is someone that like, they're not doing it for anything. They're doing it because like it's important to them to do things right. And that is a form of servant leadership to me, is that sort of leading by example, but in the things that aren't obvious, things that aren't obvious, What was the other part of your question?
What do you think is the most overlooked role?
That is definitely, that's a role that I feel like, in what I've seen, gets overlooked pretty much just daily until it becomes the most relevant thing on the team. Until the team gets to a point where they've strayed from the goodness, and then we can point to this person and be like, and use it as an example to like rebuild and reapproach like how we've been doing things. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, that person becomes super overlooked until the moment that we need them more than anything.
Yeah, like
Does that make
it's
sense?
taken for granted.
Yeah. It's taken for granted until we get to a point where it's like, all of a sudden we've strayed and we're not as disciplined. We're showing up a little bit late. We're slipping on our grades. We're not doing our accountability things. We're not going to rehab and prehab. Like, then it's like you need someone that is doing that stuff, that is like going out of their way to do things that are in service of the team. And even if that's just, like I said, just always being on time and like always making sure to give out reminders,
like
and
just
things.
doing your job kind of thing.
Yeah, like doing your job, but also reminding people of things. And you need them to be able to like readdress that. Otherwise, it's just the coach being like, "You're not disciplined," and then nobody will get it.
Yeah.
Because everyone's like, when there's someone that's like, "Yeah, they're doing better than me. They do more than me. They care more than me. They're serving more than me," like, then there's not really a counter argument.
Yeah.
So then it's like you can really make a point about your culture by pointing to someone that is always going the extra mile to help the team, you know?
Yeah, and it kind of like plays on that concept, like the person with the higher standard's always right.
Exactly. I mean, part of addressing like discipline and standards in your culture is having someone that, you know, is exemplifying that the things you're talking about, you know, as it relates to people that are in it for the team, you know, and the team goals. So, yeah, I think too, if you want to talk more candidly, what gets overlooked is these aren't necessarily roles, but when people get hurt, they get forgotten until they're back. I mean, it sucks, and we can try to not let that happen, but it's really hard.
Yeah.
Because like when you're out for a concussion, like people probably didn't check on you a whole lot. Or maybe they did at the first day, but then it's like it probably faded pretty quick.
Yeah.
Olivia Duhan, when she was out for months, like it's like she wasn't even on the team.
Yeah.
You know? And that is tough. Because then coming back is tough because you feel like you're back, but then you're not the same you yet.
Yeah.
You know, so that is a really tough, I wouldn't call it a role, but that's a tough dynamic that happens. When you starters versus non-starters is a tough dynamic because everyone wants to start and there's just more people than there are spots always, and it's brutal. And I've been on both ends of that. I've been someone that's been a starter for years and then lost my spot basically like my senior year. And yeah, it took me a while to like figure out how to be.
Yeah. No, it's like a weird culture shock, especially like to be coming from a position of like always having been the starter to like that was your role and that's what you did. So like what else do you fall back on?
Yeah.
And I think that's where the servant leadership thing kind of comes in. It's like the same thing with working towards like being a program that can consistently win is like what do you have to fall back on when stuff doesn't work out?
So with the servant leadership thing, and I just remember this right now, we kind of tried to do that. I mean, it was kind of weird the way we did it because it was, you know, secretive, but like the idea that only upperclassmen were going to do all the dirty work. But everyone always felt weird about that dynamic. Is it because we didn't know what the reason was?
To me, I don't know. I don't think I spent too much time questioning why it was the way that it was when it first happened. It was more so to me of like, okay, they're sitting here like doing all this extra work, like they're outworking me. So like when I can contribute, like I may not be able to help them like go and rake the courts after practice, but like at that point I was playing with Barbiton, who was a senior here last year, and like I was like, okay, she's doing all this extra stuff, so like how can I like make that up to her in a different way? Like how can I give her like perfect sets, and how can I like be a supportive partner and like be her cheerleader?
That's
like,
what you really thought?
That's how I felt about it. I don't know that I would say there's something that I executed as well as I wanted to, but I think that was kind of the approach that I took from it. It's like, crap, like they're doing all of this stuff, so like how can I like meet them halfway with that?
Because I think that that's a great way for us to like practice and promote servant leadership, but I don't know if it's quite landed yet.
Yeah.
And I want to keep doing it, at least in the fall semesters, you know, where it's juniors and seniors and they do all the work.
Yeah.
They get all the equipment, they set up everything, they do all the raking, and the freshmen and sophomores, they don't do any of it. Because the idea would be that, like, you would feel bad about not being able to do anything.
And that was kind of my
And then
thing.
it would make you want to take on that responsibility when you get the opportunity.
Yeah.
And, like, serve, basically, you know? I guess we just need to practice the way that that's executed. Or, I mean, do you think that it, like, because, again, like, does it defeat the purpose? Or would it have defeated the purpose if I had said, here's why we're doing this?
I think it's very circumstantial because it kind of depends on not only like someone's own individual priorities, but also like what was going on within the team dynamic at the time. Like, I feel like we tried to do that this past semester with our incoming freshmen, and I don't think that it was like received in the same way that like my class received it as freshmen, if that kind of makes sense. Because I think of other stuff that was going on, they almost felt like excluded instead of like wanting to contribute.
Right. Yeah. Maybe it's just the way of like, hey, this is just how it is. Like, this is just what we do.
Yeah.
Like, not as a response to anything, but like as a, hey, this is just a rule on our team. It's like only upperclassmen like clean the locker room, rake the courts, pick the leaves.
Yeah.
Freshmen, sophomores, like, you know, which to a lot of people seems backwards. You know, to a lot of people you would be like, you would make all the newbies do all the,
Yeah.
you know, carry all the bags and all that stuff to like earn their stripes.
Earn their keep, yeah.
Yeah. But it seems like it promotes a healthier version of like service to like have the people that already have the most experience and maturity take on even more responsibility.
Yeah.
Because they can.
Yeah. Well, it also brings in like the whole like lead by example like dynamic too.
Exactly.
Like teaching, like here's the expectation, like here's how we're gonna serve each other as a team. So it's like you're gonna fall in line with this, or like it's just not gonna work.
Yeah. Anything else you got?
Let me peek. A lot of them we like already kind of touched over with other questions. Okay, last one. I think we kind of have like danced over this a couple times, but do you think there's value in the idea of clapping for and or like supporting others until it's your turn, or should we be in a constant state of competition?
Yeah, it's another good question.
Or is there a
Yeah,
balance?
I think you can do both. I mean, it's hard on the ego. I think you can do both. I think it's hard when there's no light at the end of the tunnel for you. Like when you just don't feel like if you're competing with one person for a spot, which doesn't really happen as much in our sport, but like in other sports, if you're like playing a position
Yeah.
and you're like second string, like, I don't know. What do you think?
I think there's an element of like having to trust the process, but also like there needs to be a balance. Kind of what we were talking about earlier with like well-intended selfishness
Yeah.
and just like trusting the process that it's gonna work out so long as you like do the dirty work, and like eventually like either your good energy towards everyone else will uplift the team in one way, or it will be your turn to be the one like shining and like lifting the team up that way.
Yeah. I mean, I played baseball with this guy. The guy that basically, I don't want to say took my spot, but the guy that, at least in my head, that's what happened, took my spot. He was a freaking great guy. He was everyone's biggest fan. So it was like easier to have him take my spot.
Yeah.
Because like, I really liked him, and he was always really supportive, and he was always like, when I would get time, or when I would whatever, it's like he was like really supportive. Like he was like really like clapping for me, you know. So it made me like I didn't have any animosity towards him. I like, you know, I had my like things that I was competing with him in about, you know, but it wasn't like me against him.
Yeah.
You know, so that was really powerful to me, because I don't think I would have been I don't think I'm as like basically as good of a person as he was. And so it's the question basically that you're asking is that does it create a better circumstance if two people are just battling it out, trying to get theirs? Does that rise the tide the most?
Yeah.
Or does people who are mutually supportive of each other while they're trying to be better than each other rise the tide the most?
Yeah.
Like, what moves the needle further? And I don't know, because I could see it both ways.
Yeah.
I could see it like, and we talk about this a little bit, like, are the best teams really healthy or a little bit toxic?
Yeah.
It seems like successful teams have a little bit of toxicity to them, which is a little bit of that, like, maybe that.
Well, there's an element of like ego that like uplifts sport, and that's like why it is the way that it is.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like if we're looking at on one end of the spectrum and the other end of the spectrum, it's like which would we rather have?
Yeah.
It would be more comfortable to have us clapping for each other and competing against each other, but would we miss out on potentially reaching a higher level of performance
Yeah.
by being a little more
Yeah.
like, nah, me, Alex versus everybody.
Yeah. Well, and then it also is kind of like something we've been struggling with too, is like, does being so supportive almost like create this dynamic of like we can push each other, but then we get into competition, and like, are we gonna go and like be nasty and aggressive and like do all these things in competition, or are we just kind of like gonna like do our thing?
Yeah, that is a question I do not know, and I have mixed feelings about pretty much every day. Some days I think there's just a ton of value in like, man, us really feeling like we're together and we got each other's backs. And other times I feel like that holds us back from being fiery and competitive, which is I think what are the demands of sport is, you know?
Yeah.
That's tough. That's really tough. Like I said, I think there's a way, but like, and it goes back to kind of what you were talking about earlier, which is like, how does that dynamic relate to like you putting others before yourself and not like being as confident as you could be, going after what you want, like always just being on the sort of on the defense mentally, like always being like, oh, like making sure there's no problems, making sure everything's good. Like, does that hold you back from? Because even in life, you have these situations where it's like, if you're too much of a people pleaser, then you're actually holding yourself back from like your own potential.
Yeah, you're just gonna get steamrolled.
Yeah, you're not gonna get what you want out of their situation or the day or the week or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. And there's people that do not care about what people think.
Yeah.
And they get what they want a lot.
Yeah.
But also people don't like them.
Yeah.
So, man, it's like, and maybe I'm just like a nerd about it, but it's like, it's so fascinating. Like the dynamic of a team is like such a unique thing.
Yeah. Well,
'Cause
it's a huge gray area.
Yeah, and it's like, it's the rules, there's no other situation like it, in my opinion, because like in life, like if someone's just a jerk, like getting what they want and they're really good at it and they get it, it doesn't really matter because like you don't have to be around that person if you don't want to be around that person.
Yeah.
And even if it's at work, it's kind of like, okay, that's just work. Like that's not like
clock out, go home.
Clock in, clock out, do your work, whatever. They're gonna do their thing. On a team, like there's no escape from that. You know, it's like everything in one
we all do life
incubator.
together.
Yeah. So there has to be this balance between maintaining good relationships and getting what you want selfishly. Like, yeah, I don't know. I don't even know. I don't know how to coach. Yeah. Well, any closing thoughts on servant leadership?
I think just if anything, like understanding that it is a gray area, and I think there's a lot of value in servant leadership, but there also needs to be like a level of like well-intentioned selfishness, and just kind of, I liked the whole idea that we were playing around with like the passive question versus like the active choice.
Yeah.
I think that's like the way to maneuver it to be like the most successful that it can be.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one question actually I didn't ask, but you can touch on quickly is like, do you think that like love languages relate to like the way you would serve the team?
Definitely.
Because like right now, the things that you have been doing are essentially acts of service.
Yeah.
but is there other ways to like serve the team in a way that would be more meaningful to them, you know?
Yeah, no, I think that there is, and I know we've kind of touched on, like, there's a lot of people on our team where, like, words of affirmation is, like, the way that they receive, and, like, yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't thought about it in that way.
Because, I mean, it may shift some of the choices you choose to make. Like, maybe one week it's, like, you're, I don't know, like, writing people letters or something like that, you know? That may just make them feel like, man, so we went out of our way to, like, do that, like, make me feel good, which is an act of service, like, yeah, so that might be something to think about.
No, I
because
like that.
I was thinking about that.
Well, there's a point where I was going to make cookies, but I was like, half of people's accountability goals is, like, to not eat sweets. And so then I kind of just, like, backed away from that idea.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's been an interesting one.
Interesting debate.